It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our 2023 Spring Saturday University Lecture Series on Architecture of Asia, Sacred Space, and Cultural Landscapes. Since the fall of 2022 to this spring, we've been exploring architecture and sacred spaces around Asia with focus on the ecological landscapes, the built environment, seen from the historical moment to our present, and how architects and artists envisioned sacredness and employed architecture to rethink our relationship to the nature, our cities, and to our rapidly changing climates, and sought to creative resolutions in decolonial thinking to create sacredness in the everyday and what we can learn from them. We're very excited to host today's lecture on one of the most acclaimed architect, Tadao Ando, Sacred Architecture in Nothingness and the Cross of the Light, led by Jin Baek, whom I'll introduce in a moment. I just have a brief announcement and we'll get to today's lecture. Next slide, please. We'd like to encourage you to visit our much praised ECOT exhibition happening at downtown location. It presents over 100 textiles, creating immersive tactile experience to learn more about the time-honored art that reminds the viewers the power of slow fashion and sacredness of clothing as art. And next slide, please. Also, if you haven't yet, we encourage you to visit the Beyond Mountain contemporary Chinese artists on the classical forms and see the Dreamscape by artist Lam Tung Pong. They encourage us to reflect on our inner worlds and also media installation that juxtapose ancient mountain sites to Chinese urban landscapes. And to also recently installed historically noted performance by Zhang Huan that took place actually at the Asian Art Museum. Next slide, please. Also, there is an American Art, The Stories We Carry exhibition in downtown location. This is a quite recently installed exhibition that features extensive collaboration among SAM's curators, staff, artists, and community members that reinterpreted the collection to meet the present moment. And next slide, please. Another are downtown exhibitions, Reverberations, Contemporary Art, and Modern Classics. It brings a dialogue between historical work and contemporary artists who are active today, who uses their body to address social and political and emotional concerns of our time. Many works are on the view for the first time, among which includes modern art by Francis Bacon, Franz Klein, to recent works by artists such as Margarita Cabrera, Senega Nangidu, and Sarah Z, to name just a few. And lastly, we'd like to invite you, next slide, please, to our last offering of Sand, Body, and Mind in coming weeks at our beautiful Olympic Sculpture Park. Join us and enjoy yoga, sound bath, and art making. It's open to public, but registration is required. So we encourage you to visit our exhibitions and exciting offerings. Now, it gives me incredible pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Next slide, please. Dr. Jin Baek was joining us from Seoul, Korea. It's quite early morning there to offer a talk titled Tadao Ando's Sacred Architecture, Nothingness, and the Cross of the Light. Jin Baek is a professor at the Department of Architecture and Architectural Engineering at the Seoul National University, a preeminent architectural institution in Asia. Jin has developed an interdisciplinary, a dynamic presence in the field of architecture, architectural engineering, urban studies, and research and philosophy around phenomenology and its relation to how we experience space, cities, and our societies. His research focuses on phenomenology, environmental ethics, cultural significance of urban regenerations, cross-cultural issues between modern East Asian architecture and the Western architecture. He's the author of Nothingness, Tadao Ando's Christian Sacred Space, Architecture as Ethics of Climate, and lastly, Hungnyu Giheng, A Drifting Through the Landscapes. It is also wonderful to have Dr. Juan Heredia here with us as a moderator for today's event. Juan is an associate professor and the director of Portland State University School of Architecture. He studied architecture at the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City and practiced architecture. He completed his Ph.D. in architecture in the University of Pennsylvania. His research and writing focused on, but not limited to, the architecture of the 20th century, especially that of Mexico. He is the author of First Modern Building in Mexico, co-editor of Routledge Handbook of the Reception of Classical Architecture, and co-author of Juan Sordo Madaleno. And we're grateful for this incredible opportunity to host our brilliant speakers on Tadao Ando's Sacred Architecture and Nothingness and the Cross of Light. Thank you again on behalf of the Gardner Center. And I'll turn it over to you, Jin.
Thank you very much. My name is Jin Baek. I'm a faculty member at the Department of Architecture and Architectural Engineering at Seoul National University. I have to say that it's my great honor to be invited to this Saturday university lecture series. I'd like to share my screen before I begin my lecture today. Do you see my screen? I hope, yeah. The title of my talk today is Tadao Ando's Sacred Architecture, Nothingness, and the Cross of Light. With this title, I'd like to talk a little bit longer than an hour. I have to confess that I'm not a native speaker in English, so I may make mistakes, but you can always raise questions during the question and answer session to ask me to clarify the parts you're not sure about. So let's get into my talk today. Tadao Ando, he is surely one of the greatest architects of our time. He came recently to our department. We prepared a venue for his talk, and the venue was to accommodate about 1,000 people. And when you opened the registration, the tickets sold out almost like in 10 minutes. And we were able to see how popular Tadao Ando is. It was quite amazing to see his popularity. He's amazing in that he did not receive any formal architectural education at a university, but he is one of the greatest architects of our time. That's a great achievement. After graduating from a professional high school, he became a boxer. Part of the reason he became a boxer was because he could travel abroad. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, it was extremely rare for one to be able to travel abroad. And as far as I know, he had one game in Philippines. And as far as I know, he lost the game after being beaten a lot. And he came to realization that boxing was not his call. So he decided to apply the fighting money to traveling, to visit, in particular, Le Corbusier's architecture. I'm sure you heard about Le Corbusier. And it's a fascinating life story of a human being who overcome the hierarchical obstacle of education and social status in East Asia. I have written 2 books with Routledge, and both of these books deal with Ando's architecture. The first is exclusively dedicated to Ando's masterpiece, The Church of the Light. This book was based upon my doctoral thesis at the University of Pennsylvania. And I believe this book was the reason why I came to be invited to this lecture series today. But the other book does not deal with exclusively Ando's architecture. However, it includes discussion on Ando's two works. One, The Church of the Light, and the other, Azuma House, from the perspective of climate and architecture. So you're looking at, on the left, The Church of the Light, on the right, the Azuma House. I have to confess that not every work of Ando is attractive to me. It must be the case with any great architect. And for me, these two works are two of his best works. He designed these two works during his early career. Azuma House was designed first in 1976, and the Church of the Light was designed and built in 1989. Azuma House is a mundane residential work. The other is a sacred religious work. However, there is a continuity in setting up the relationship between architecture and nature, in embodying the sense of space Ando was pursuing. I'd like to comment on Azuma House briefly before I enter into the discussion of the Church of the Light. This house made Ando into an architect of national and international prominence, even though it's a very small size house. If you look at the lot, if you look at the plans on the right side, the lot is long, deep, and narrow. And Ando builds a very monolithic and simple concrete building. He divides the lot into three rectangles. Do you see my red pointing, right? So he divides the lot into three rectangles. And what is surprising is that, as you can see from the photo, Ando leaves the middle one empty to create a courtyard open to the sky. And this is a very unusual and even unacceptable approach. The land value in Osaka is extremely high. Nobody would waste 1/3 of the lot unless he or she is out of mind. But Ando persuaded the client to open up the middle part toward the sky. Now, there's another condition that's also unacceptable. If I were the client of this building, let's take a look at the plan. This is the first floor, and this is the second floor. The house was again divided into three parts. This is the entrance part, the open courtyard, and then at the back is a dining, kitchen, and toilet or restroom. But then if you look at the second floor, there are two rooms, and these two rooms are connected through a bridge, and there is a stairway leading you down. Now imagine you get a call from nature in the middle of the night, let's say at 2 a.m., and you wake up, and then you try to do the work, urinating, and you open the door, and it's raining, unfortunately. So you find an umbrella, you open up the umbrella, you cross the bridge. Let's say you're in this room, you cross the bridge, you take the stairway, you go down to this room at the back, you go down further, deep further to reach the restroom, and you urinate for 1 minute or two, and then you come out the room, take stair again, and take the bridge again, and you enter the room. And by the time you get completely wet because it was raining, and you cannot get a sleep again because you are wet and you needed to change your clothes. And a moment like this is almost unacceptable, right? Tadao Ando could have been wiser by preparing another restroom or bathroom on the second floor by not wasting the middle part, which is open to the sky. There must be a great reason to put a courtyard in the middle then, as we discover these unacceptable conditions. So we may wonder what the role of the courtyard is. And I also actually wonder why Tadao Ando did this approach, which is in a way very imposing, which could be almost violent if you think about the uncomfortable or inconvenient moment I was explaining. So for me, the reason he put this courtyard in the middle is to restore our contact with climate, its constant changes, instead of making one being locked up within mechanically controlled artificial environment. Ando criticized shopping arcades and atriums, which are prevalent in Osaka. He said in those places, climate was erased. Regardless of what happens at the outside, shopping arcades and atriums do not get affected. Climate's constant change does not matter at all. Then why is the contact with climate important? There's a cultural background here. The Japanese like to talk about weather. They greet in the morning by describing the weather, like Ando sensei, it's cold this morning, and that's the greeting. It's like hi, hello. If you find the weather cold, you will put on more clothes on your children. Here you become a father, really. Climate is a medium through which who you are is going to be articulated and expressed. Climate is a fundamental and important medium through which the human relationship dynamic comes to be concretized. So when climate is erased, a fundamental medium for the articulation and concretization of the human relationship is erased or is in danger. So climate is the medium that joins I, you, he, and she into we. It leads us to act and to shape a collective measure in coping with a climatic condition. According to Ando, we have been erasing the presence of climate in daily setting by adopting technology such as mechanical air control and by focusing on aesthetics of imagery. The Church of the Light is the main topic of my talk today. It surely is a great masterpiece in post-war Christian architecture. What is striking about the church is the subdued, dark setting, as if molding darkness were the first task undertook voluntarily in working on this project. The amount of light that's admitted is very minimal. To the right, on the left, on the image on the left, there is a floor-to-ceiling window. But behind the window stands a high wall to allow only indirect and small amount of light to enter the interior. The other source of light is the famous cross. It's a slit of light, while it is a cross. Again, other than these two, the window and the cross, there is no other source of light. In discussing the cultural significance of the Church of the Light, I will refer to several leading thinkers, theologians, and architects of the 20th century. First, within Japan, there are three figures I'd like to introduce briefly today. The first is, to the left, Kitaro Nishida, a philosopher. Then Daisetsu Suzuki, a Zen Buddhism scholar. And lastly, Junichiro Tanizaki, a writer and cultural critique. Now, outside Japan, there are two figures I'd like to comment on today. The first is a German architect named Rudolf Schwarz, to the far right. And the second figure is a German-American existentialist theologian, Paul Tillich. Now, among the Japanese figures, I'd like to discuss Nishida's philosophy a little bit, more than the other two. It was quite intriguing to get to know the fact that Ando was selected as the architect for the Museum of Kitaro Nishida's philosophy, built in Unokemachi, Nishida's hometown. I have to confess, though, that this building is good, yet not as exciting as other works by Ando. What I'd like to focus on is the idea of nothingness itself a little bit. It's an idea Nishida discussed in his philosophy. Nothingness is considered as the major achievement of Nishida's philosophy. And I put this word nothingness in the title for today's talk. Looking back, I regret it a little bit because it's not going to be easy to talk about, to explain what nothingness is. But as I have already put it, I guess I cannot avoid discussing it a little bit. So I'll try. In Chinese letter, nothingness is mu. You can see on the screen, mu with Chinese character. And if you hear nothingness, some of you may be automatically reminded of the nihilistic, bottomless nothing. However, nothingness is not nihilistic nothing. If you bear with me, I'll do a little bit of philosophical and religious reflection on this nothingness. Nishida's philosophy of nothingness can be traced back to the ancient Indian philosophy of sunyata. Sunyata means emptiness. Nagarjuna is the founder of the Madhyamaka school of Mahayana Buddhism. Nagarjuna introduced sunyata to Buddhism. I said that Sunyata means emptiness, and Nagarjuna, with this Sunyata, Nagarjuna sought to solidify doctrines of no self or selflessness and codependent origination. If you think about the color black, it already presupposes other colors like white, right? Am I right? Yes. And therefore, one may argue that what makes black is not in black itself, but in its relationship with the other colors, in its relationship with what it is not. In other words, black itself is empty in terms of identity. Identity is not fixed from the beginning, rather it emerges in reference to what it is not. It goes against our conception of identity. We tend to think that identity is fixed from the beginning. Identity is, for instance, within my own self, but it's not. According to Sunyata, identity is not within one's own self. It is only emerging in reference to or in relation with others or what I am not. The self, if you apply to this idea of Sunyata to the notion of the self is fundamentally empty. Who I am emerges in reference to who I am not. So who I am is bound to who I am not, paradoxically. Who I am is bound to who I am not. And nothingness is the embracive universal out of which who I am and who I am not emerge in co-originating or co-dependent fashion. Now, Nishida revived and renewed this religious philosophy of Sunyata to confront negative facets of modernity, such as self-enclosed subjectivism. I was talking about our tendency to consider identity as residing within my own self. It's a trait of what is called self-enclosed subjectivism. And Nishida was trying to confront this facet of modernity. Nishida was in search of true universal, truly universal. He thought nothingness was true universal. To make a long story short, the reason why nothingness is true universal is that nothingness includes within itself its own negation as the way to be related and connected to the relative or to the particular. This may sound a little bit strange, but Nishida's inquiry, again, was about our conventional conception of universal is really universal. He said it's not, because our conception of universal usually is about supposing something that transcends the relative only objectively. And it becomes merely another relative, no matter how that universal is extensive and inclusive it might be. So in order for a universal to be truly universal, it has to include its own negation within itself to give rise to particulars or relatives like who I am and who I am not. Well, there is a religious context that emerges out of this very distinctive notion of nothingness as the true universal. I said that the true universal includes its own self-negation within itself. And Nishida connected this with the Christian conception of God, who is transcendental, yet simultaneously immanent in the world. Nothingness, which includes its own negation within itself, resonates with agape, the divine love in Christianity. The world God did not have to come down to the world. He did not have to take the form of the human being, but he took the form of the human being. It's a form of self-negation. The absolute becomes the relative. It's absurd, really. The absolute becomes the relative voluntarily. It's absurd. But anyway, with this notion of a true universal nothingness, Nishida was able to theorize a connection between Buddhism and Christianity. It's a religious context that was in operation during the later part of the during 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. Nishida's disciples were trying to create a connection between Buddhism and Christianity with this nothingness as true universal. Now, there is another dimension I'd like to comment on in reference to nothingness. It's about the notion of the body and perception. When you see a statement, I hope you can bear with me just with this slide and the one that follows, and then I get into architecture, I promise. When you see this statement, I feel cold, we see two things, I and coldness, two different things. Yet, it is a thinking that's possible only because there's a deeper union in which the I and the coldness are intertwined. So the condition out of which I feel cold, this division between the I and coldness emerges, is a pre-reflective, preliminary, or more fundamental bond, union between the I and coldness. At this point, I am coldness. We do not decide when we encounter coldness whether I'm gonna accept the coldness or not. We get automatically imbued by coldness. Coldness penetrates us as if the self is an empty capacity. When we sensate coldness, the human body operates as the capacity to be filled with the coldness, what is offered by the world. Then the thinking emerges, I feel cold. So according to Nishida, this I am coldness that stays at the bottom of I feel cold is the ground out of which thinking emerges. Therefore, I am coldness is called by Nishida Uru thinking, or the depths of thinking. It was also called cogitation of cogitation. The sensational union with coldness stays at the bottom of our habitual dichotomous thinking. The sensational engagement with coldness, for instance, progresses toward action. at the moment when the body's capacity to accept coldness overflows. And Nishida says that the self, its capacity, is overturned. The limit of the self is exposed. The imbalance leads one to act, to, for instance, find charcoal, to put on more clothes, or to put on more clothes on children, and so forth. The body here becomes a capacity of sensation. It also transcends to the horizon of action, creation. And this is the notion of the body Tadao Ando was commenting on a lot. Ando defined Shintai, the Japanese word for body, as the sensational capacity to be imbued unconditionally by what is offered by the world and to transcend the horizon of sensation to move toward the horizon of action and creation. About the two Westerners, Rudolf Schwartz is important. In my interview with Ando confessed that he visited this church by Rudolf Schwartz. It's a monumental Catholic church in Aachen, Germany. It was built around 1930. It's a Catholic church, but it's very unusual. As you can see, no ornament from the outside is observed. It's a building with simple geometry, constructed out of a thick white wall, punctuated with minimum number of openings. The interior is also surprisingly simple. Schwartz assigns an unusually high ceiling to the nave, and in contrast, the single aisle on the right flank of the church is given much lower height. This striking volumetric contrast between the nave and the aisle creates the sense of openness and oneness between the congregation on one side and the altar, where a black marble table is located. Schwartz wrote a book, The Church Incarnate, and here he talks about emptiness as the dwelling place of God. This is what he said. All these likenesses seek to say that God dwells in the emptiness. They are good insofar as they succeed in bringing emptiness nearer to human comprehension. He wrote this book, as far as I know, after he built the church. So he embodied emptiness first, and then he wrote all about it. And he must have thought about the church as he was writing his comment on emptiness, where God dwells. Paul Tillich, probably one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century, during the post-war period, he wrote about sacred emptiness. It's a rather long quote, but it's filled with very inspirational phrases. You find a phrase like infinite distance between the divine and the human, between God and the world, a distance bridged only by the divine word. And he comments on sacred emptiness that symbolizes this infinite distance that can be only reached by the divine word. And Tillich was talking about this in the context of Protestant architecture. Entering into the discussion of Ando's Church of the Light, The spatial emptiness we see here is another great example of what Tillich called sacred emptiness, I believe. What is further interesting about this church is that this is not only about sacred emptiness, because this sacred emptiness is equipped with a very remarkable presence of the cross. When Tillich was talking about sacred emptiness in a different part of the writing, he said that sacred emptiness was about waiting for a refreshed returning of the cross. The 20th century was filled with genocide, right? If you think about killing of so many people by other people, a lot of such incidents happened in the 20th century. So Tillich was talking about sacred emptiness as a way of we becoming modest, way of we having realized our inhumanity. So emptiness was a sort of setting a preliminary condition at a moment when God seems to have disappeared. As a preliminary condition, then sacred emptiness was inscribed with the hope that God may return. I get reminded of this kind of story by Tillich as I look at this church, combination between sacred emptiness and a very refreshed returning of the cross. The location of the cross in this church is very unique. Shall we say it's inside or outside? Maybe it stands both inside and outside. As a matter of fact, looking into the location of the cross itself in Christian architecture is quite interesting. We have an example like this. It's a church in Otaniemi, Finland. Here you see the cross situated at the outside of the church. The front wall is treated in a very unusual manner. It's replaced by glass completely. It's very unusual. And the cross is set at a distance from this glass front wall. The cross appears by taking the small forest as the background. Ando himself created a similar situation. He designed the church with the cross set at the outside of the church, in this case, in the middle of an artificial pond. The church is named Church on the Water. It's in Hokkaido. The front wall of the church is treated as a full glass wall that can be slid along a track. So the front can be completely open to formulate a dramatic, sort of direct engagement with the cross. Now, within Japan, there is possibly reference for this positioning of the cross in the middle of water. It's a shrine, Itsukushima Shrine. And this shrine has a torii gate that stands in the middle of the sea. The shrine was accessed from the sea with a boat, as it was sitting in an island. And people say that probably Ando was inspired by this torii of the Itsukushima Shrine as he was designing this church. What is surprising, however, is the fact that the church on the water Though named church, it's not a proper Christian church. It was built as a wedding chapel operated by a hotel. It is only sporadically used as worshiping place for and by local Christians. The young Japanese usually get married in a Shinto shrine. You must have seen their marriage, they're getting married in a Shinto shrine in films. However, some of them like to get married in a setting that looks like a Christian church, even though they are not Christians. In Japan, less than 1% of the population are Christians. Christianity is a very sort of minor religion. It has the image of the religion of very special intellectual people, not the religion of the public. The reason the young Japanese get married in a church, even though, again, they are not Christians, is that they think the wedding style, quote, looks nice. It's very romantic appropriation of Christianity and Christian wedding style. If I can add another reason, in the case of marriage at a shrine, the moment of vow is unclear and skimpy. In contrast, in the Christian style wedding, the moment of vowing, commitment, is clearer than the style that's done in a Shinto shrine. But this was propagandized as a church in the West. But again, in reality, it's a wedding chapel. Now, anyway, the Church of the Light is a proper Christian church built for a small local Christian community. And the location of the cross is distinctive as it stands between the inside and the outside. The cross is created by piercing the front wall. It gives rise to not only the Gestalt, figure, ground, oscillation, right? We get sort of amusingly confused about what is figure and what is ground as you look at the front wall. It also gives rise to an oscillation between the iconic value of the cross and its role as the transparent vehicle for the introduction of light. Ando paid a lot of attention to the design and construction of the cross. The church was built with concrete without any insulation. The construction budget was extremely limited, and luckily, Osaka, compared to Seoul, Osaka is not as cold as Seoul. But usually people expect the installation of insulation, but Ando skipped it. It's basically a monolithic concrete wall from the interior to the exterior. Ando sought to formulate an exquisitely refined, smooth surface. He had assistants help the vibrating process with manual ramps on the day of pouring concrete. You look at here, okay, you see the concrete formwork. We pour concrete, but sometimes the board gets become its shape. It sort of bulges out because of the weight of the concrete, and it's a failure of construction. What Ando did was, again, he had his assistants come out to the construction site to do some vibrating with manual ramps. The reason was to remove vapors in the concrete, because there is the way to create smoothness on the surface of the concrete, but there is danger of ruining the construction process. So the assistant had to be very careful. Now, if you look at the photo on the right, it's the moment right after the shuttering board were dismantled. Now, if any defect is found on the surface of the concrete, that defect was not going to be mended, because if the defect were patched later, it would weather as time passes, it would weather in a different phase from the remaining part of the wall, and it's going to detract. It's going to bring down the quality of homogeneity, smooth homogeneity of the surface. So you do the best during the process of construction. Once the construction is done, you do not touch again to create smoothness on the part of the surface. Now, in creating the cross on the front wall, there arose a structural problem. When a structural consultant saw Ando's design of the cross on the front wall, he advised to shorten the length of the arm of the cross. Why would this be the case? Look at this. The front wall is divided into 4 parts. Now, these 2 upper parts, each of these weighs 5 tons, but you don't see any support. Basically, they are hanging, hovering in the air. And it's a structural problem. So the structural consultant advised Ando to shorten the arm of the cross so that at least some portion of the wall can be continuous to support the 2 upper parts. It was a very rational, reasonable advice. However, Ando insisted to keep the arm of the cross as running from one end of the front wall to the other end. Now, this means that a huge amount of rebars or steel had to be embedded in the roof to suspend the 2 sections from the roof. So these 2 parts had to be supported or suspended from the roof. And this means that there will be a lot of amount of steel that had to be put in the roof. And you may remember that the construction budget was extremely little, limited. And this was part of the reason why insulation was omitted. So in this context, it is wise to avoid any measure that's going to increase the construction budget to a significant degree. But Ando chose to go with the original design, in which the arm runs from one end of the front wall to the other end. This means that the iconic clarity of the cross, the iconic clarity of the cross that stands against the remaining part of the front wall was extremely important for Ando. The cross, as we see, has been formulated through this process of construction and this process of going against structural rationality. For the iconic clarity, In other words, Ando sacrificed structure and spent extra budget. If you're a client, would you accept this? The relationship between the iconic clarity and structural rationality is an intriguing matter in Christian architecture. I'm going to introduce a building to you so that you may have a better understanding of Ando's church. This is another masterpiece in Christian architecture of the 20th century. The architect is Sigurd Leverentz. Here you see in the middle a vertical, thick, masculine structural column. On the column is a horizontal structural member. And on top of the arm are two huge girders. On top of the girders, we see a series of shelvert running perpendicular to the girders below. The structural articulation is perfect, rational, and beautiful. It's really a perfect structural articulation. Yet, at the same time, the central column and the arm is a cross, or a T-shaped cross. T-shaped cross is a cross in Christianity that symbolizes the moment when Jesus tilted down his head as he stopped breathing. This is a part which I think I learned from Dr. Juan Manuel Heredia, the moderator today, as we were studying together during our PhD period. Here we are looking at two great churches of the 20th century, yet they present diametrically opposite approach to the relationship between iconic clarity and structure. Leverentz's church is a harmonious case. What is iconic is also structurally rational. In Ando's case, what is iconic is unstructural. Can you say that Ando's approach is wrong? Leverentz's approach is superior? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's a case by case. Structure can be sometimes modified because the iconic clarity is truly important in some cases. I hope there is a harmony, but not every time we can achieve harmony between iconic clarity and structural rationality. Another aspect I'd like to talk about is the issue of subdued darkness as the setting for the re-illumination of the cross. Here I'd like to introduce a book by Tanizaki. In Praise of Shadows, Tanizaki talks about the significance of darkness in Japanese craft tradition. For instance, Tanizaki claims that gilded lacquerware pieces are supposed to be seen in a dark setting with a minimum amount of light that may be introduced from a garden nearby. Japanese artisans, when they gild lacquerware pieces, they supposed a dark room to be the only proper setting, spatial setting for the placement and appreciation of the pieces. In darkness, the applied gold picks up whatever feeble light there is in the room, harnessing darkness as an indispensable element of the beauty. Ando stands in this tradition. He comes from this tradition. He appreciates darkness as the preliminary setting for something that's important to emerge. In appreciating darkness, Ando criticized architects like Miss van der Loo, a master architect of the 20th century. Mrs. Glass buildings lack darkness and lack, therefore, the dialectic between light and dark. This building that stands on Park Avenue in Manhattan is truly a representative work of Mrs. Architecture and also of the architecture of the 20th century as a whole. It's a building that popularized a high-rise tower with glass curtain wall on all sides. And many followers appeared, and they sort of imitated this building with curtain wall construction method is found economic and also aesthetic, as it was following Miss van der Loo's aesthetics. The interior would be something like this. It's a laboratory condition, regardless of, again, whatever happens at the outside in terms of a climate, it's not going to affect the interior. The interior does not get life through interacting with what's happening at the outside. 24 hours, it maintains the same condition, same amount of light, and same quality of air, all mechanically controlled. Ando would claim that there is no space here. There is no space here because there is no dialectic between light and dark. What Ando would endorse is this, something like this. A space like this is equipped with dialectic between light and dark. Probably this church is one of the very best works that embodies the dialectic between light and dark, a dark setting with a little amount of light. I explained that during the construction, Ando put a lot of efforts to formulate refined smoothness on the concrete surface. And thanks to this refined quality, we see a fictive transformation of the mundane concrete wall into a wall that appears as gilded. Take a look at this part. Take a look at this part. See the appearance that looks like gilded. Did Ando apply gold there? No, he did not. I said that construction budget was extremely limited. He skipped insulation, partially for that reason. It's purely concrete. Nevertheless, as it was rendered smooth, extremely refined in its interaction with light that comes through the cross, the wall appears as if gilded. In the history of Christian architecture that adopts concrete as the main material, there is another monumental church in Japan. It's St. Mary's Cathedral by Gencho Danke. And this cathedral has a cross-shaped skylight. In a way, the cross is on the ceiling, on the roof. The interior shows great influence of Le Corbusier's treatment of concrete. The interior is finished with rough-hewn exposed concrete. Again, it's an influence from Le Corbusier. You're looking at the interior of Le Corbusier's chapel at the Dominican monastery in La Tourette, France, on the right, and take a look at the treatment of concrete on the interior. It's very rough. Although Le Corbusier was probably the master of the 20th century architecture, and Genjo Danke was the fatherly figure for Japanese contemporary architecture, Ando was dissatisfied with the rough-hewn, exposed concrete. Le Corbusier's rough-hewn, exposed concrete has a lot of minute pockets, and these pockets capture light in. When the beam of light hits the surface of the wall, it gets captured within the pockets. Ando's wall is different. It's highly polished. There are no pockets. When light hits the surface, light gets instantly reflected and refracted back into the spatial emptiness. While Ando molded darkness as the preliminary setting, he maximizes the effect of this small amount of light that comes in to the chapel by polishing the wall without any minute pockets. Getting into the final part of my presentation today, I'd like to comment on the issue of the body and perception. I discussed in the beginning nothingness, and then I introduced the idea of the body as the sensational capacity and as the agency of act. Let's take a look at the way Ando situated the church on the site. There is a bus station here. From the bus station, one starts the journey and turns right and moves up along the slope and turn left again, turn left again, a lot of turns. And finally, one enters this small triangular vestibule, and there, the person turns almost 180-degree turn to discover the cross. Now, up to the moment the person reaches the triangular vestibule, the whole passageway is rather labyrinthine. It's a combination of a series of turns. And at the end of this labyrinthine passageway is a dramatic, straightforward axiality with the cross as the ultimate focus of attention, as you can see from the photo on the right, on the left. The axiality, the straightforward axiality, this monumental straightforward axiality, at the end of which the cross stands, has been reinforced, augmented through the preliminary labyrinthine passageway. Put differently, the labyrinthine passageway sets a condition for the heightened, refreshed, renewed presence of the axiality and the cross. It's about facing the cross. It's about monumentalizing the moment one faces the cross. Now, I said that there is no insulation in this church. Imagine on a winter day, you come into the church with an expectation that the inside must be warm, but you get betrayed. There is no insulation. You find yourself still cold, even after you are in. Your body is imbued coldness. then you face the cross of light. It's warm, bright, and intense. Your body that has been penetrated by coldness, that has been imbued with coldness, is going to be automatically drawn towards the light. The light attracts you. Your body, without your knowing, is going to be drawn towards the light. And the light is the cross is the light. When you hear the cross in Christianity, in reference to Christianity, a lot of us may imagine a young Jew going through unthinkable pain on the cross. The cross is the site of pain and agony. It's the symbol of unbearable, inhumane persecution. Now, for this reason, Daisetsu Suzuki, the father of modern Zen Buddhism, defined the cross as the symbol of cruelty and inhumanity. His intention was not looking down Christianity. He was just sad about Jesus. It was impossible for him even to imagine Jesus hanging on the cross, shedding blood. It was too painful for him. So out of pity and compassion, he said this: the cross is the symbol of cruelty and inhumanity. According to Suzuki, he is the one who popularized Zen in the West, Suzuki. Buddhism's view of death is different. After mortification and acquisition of the enlightenment, Sakamuni, his body was well dried, as any oily fat has been removed from the body. However, he was not suffering. His body was not tortured. His body was not bloody. When Buddha left for Nirvana, the paradise somewhere in the far west, he lay flat in a peaceful way. He was even smiling a bit. He was surrounded by his disciples. No crime, no bloody sin, as Buddha is heading for Nirvana. This is the concept of death in Buddhism, according to Suzuki. Peace, not torture. Rest and peace, not agony. Peace combined with the posture of horizontality symbolizes Buddhism's notion of death for Suzuki. Suzuki contrasted this with the unbearable, bloody suffering with the hanging posture of verticality of Jesus or of Christianity. This is the last slide. We have listened to the characterization by Suzuki, but I wonder if Suzuki had seen this cross, whether he would have said the same thing about the cross. Suzuki's characterization of the cross and its vertical posture operates as a good reference against which we may measure the cultural achievement of the cross of light by Ando. First, Suzuki's claim about the bloody, twisted image of Jesus on the cross is found untenable for the case of the cross of light in this church. The cross Suzuki probably had in mind was a Baroque crucifix. In contrast, the cross in this church is an empty one. Remember that the tomb was empty after the persecution. As it is an empty cross, it operates as a slit for the introduction of light. It appears as if it were the unlimited source of gold to be reflected upon the smooth concrete wall. On account of this, I think the cross you see here is not concerned with the unbearable and unimaginable persecution of Jesus, but rather it is concerned with his glory to follow the passion. The cross as the light is pretty reflectively apprehended by the believer who has been imbued with coldness. Pretty reflectively, meaning that you don't really make a decision about whether I'm going to be accepting the light or not. It really happens before reflection. The cross of light in its verticality embodies restlessness, working, fighting, battling, suffering, victory, and glory, since without battle, there is no victory. There's neither victory nor glory. I think Suzuki was right. The horizontal posture on the deathbed of a Buddha symbolizes rest and peace, not agony. But in contrast, again, the verticality, the vertical posture of Jesus that's implied through this cross of light is about, again, working, fighting, battling, but then victory and glory. So in this regard, the emptiness of the cross is a cross-cultural synthesis between Christianity and Zen Buddhism. The cross's emptiness does not de-emphasize Jesus' suffering on the cross to entertain the wish of Zen Buddhism, but I think this cross's emptiness illuminates the glory of the resurrected Jesus that comes after the persecution. And this was a fact that is not fully attended to by Suzuki. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jin, for leading us into this deep dive, spiritually philosophical formation of Ando's thinking that is based on Japanese traditions, as well as sacred space in the West. And there are so many different threads that you explored and has taken us from Ando's consideration of nature, designing purposeful inconvenience of the coldness to experience nature and the cross at the Church of Light. There's so many reflection that is in that you could go on and on, that is very much situated the Saturday University's theme. But for the sake of time, I will just move swiftly to the Q&A between Juan and Jin. And we have a Q&A box below the screen. So if you have any questions, please type those questions in the Q&A chat box. They will briefly exchange remarks. Jin and Juan will be in conversation. And if you could type in the question, we will we'll deliver it to Juan and move on from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Jin, for this very thoughtful lecture. I wonder, for the sake of time also, I would limit myself to just a couple of questions, and maybe a conversation ensues also with the help of the questions from the audience. Maybe the first thing is asking about, to what extent did Ando read or knew about such deep literature? Maybe not Tanizaki or Schwartz, one an architect and another a writer, but the more deep theological and philosophical work of Suzuki and Nishida Kitaro and Paul Tillich also.
Yeah. I don't think Ando read those pieces of literature. I think Tanizaki is a sort of classic writer. So Japanese high school students, university students, I think must read Tanizaki. Probably a portion of literature by Suzuki must be read by I think Japanese young people, but not surely I think Nishida. And also, of course, Tillich's literature. I don't think Ando would have read Tillich's literature. It's a good question, but I think that what comes to clearly our consciousness is not the only thing we are aware of or we get influenced by, and that's I think the meaning of or notion of tradition and history. So even though Ando did not read Nishida, what Nishida was trying to formulate, how to confront negative facets of modernity, such as self-enclosed subjectivism, right? I explained subjectivism with the notion of identity. I think Ando, as he was living in the same period, younger than Nishida, though, still I think Ando must have shared certain sense about the problem of modernity and some issues together with Nishida. And his architecture, I think, could be seen as emerging out of this cultural context. In particular, the notion of the body, Ando often comments on, cannot be fully understood without referring to Nishida, because Nishida articulates the best about what our body can do, what our body is about. And Ando must have not reached such a level of understanding when he talked about body, but surely I think he was reaching toward that notion of the body. And my job, I guess, was trying to reveal or clarify the depths of the body Ando, as an architect, was trying to adopt. And the same goes to Paul Tillich. Probably as a Westerner, as Tillich is a Western writer, there must be a lot less possibility that Ando was aware of Tillich or read Tillich. But again, this notion of emptiness Tillich was talking about, I think, operates as a good cultural background out of which we may understand the spatial emptiness Ando was trying to embody as the sort of first task in approaching the project Church of the Light. So, yeah, that's what I can say.
Thank you, Jin. Another thing that caught my attention is the discussion of the church on the water, that you seem to, in a way, contrast with this other more formal Christian church, right?
Yeah.
And in that sense, in looking at the interior, I wonder if you can maybe elaborate a little bit on how it is used, the church,
Which church?
The Church of the
The
Light.
Church of the Light. Yeah, yeah.
Just in reference to the way in which religious architecture has sometimes very regimented or choreographed actions and movements and rituals and processions. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. I think I have been criticized for not paying attention, due attention to the ritual itself that's happening in this church, and I acknowledge that actually. As you look at the photo on the right side, right, you can see.
You're not sharing the screen now.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
You see the images, right?
Yes.
To the right, you can see people participating in the service. You can see the location of the pulpit, and so the pastor stands to the right, right? And to the left, we cannot see, but there is an altar table. And then there is congregation along this stepping up pews. They sit. So there is a sort of emphasis on the cross itself, as you can see from here, because the altar is placed to the side. It's not at the center, right? And also the pulpit then has to position itself on the other side. The central part is just opened up so that the presence of the cross can be really fully emphasized. So somehow there is a de-emphasis on the elements of the ritual, like the altar, at least, which you may expect in a conventional setting of Christianity, which you may find themselves to be very important. But here, it's not really the case in a way. And I don't know how do I interpret this, other than saying that the cross itself and facing as one enters the cross was important for Ando. About the cross, Ando's original intention was not to put glass on the cross. His intention was to leave it empty, so that not only light, but also wind can come in. And his idea was opposed by the congregation, because the congregation worried about the health of the pastor, as still Osaka is cold in winter. So if it's open, the cold wind may come in and it's going to affect the health of the pastor. But again, somehow Ando's sense of sacredness is very much related to the presence of natural elements like light and wind, restoring contact with light and wind, which was the theme in the Azuma House I was introducing in the beginning. Whether this relates to Shintoism or some pantheism, I really don't know, but the sense of sacredness in Ando's architecture cannot be explained without commenting on this close, restored relationship between human being and natural element. So this was the part that was emphasized. And I don't think Ando is a Christian, so I don't think he understood the importance of ritual and the elements of the ritual clearly enough. So maybe from that perspective, his church was not perfect, but from a different perspective, again, it's a good, important example of the notion of sacred architecture as it tries to restore our connection with natural elements in the setting of darkness. But then natural element takes the form of the cross, right? The cross. In Azuma House, there is no cross. It's just unmediated contact with natural element. But here, the icon, the cross, gets combined with natural element. And that's another interesting achievement of this sacred architecture. Sorry that I don't think I am answering good now.
It was
to
clear
your
enough.
question.
So
yeah.
Without the introduction of the glass, it would have
Yeah.
been also a church of the light and air.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, so let me read some questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Felipe Borja asks, did Ando and Luis Barragan, the Mexican architect, ever exchange ideas on Christian architecture? He can help but think about Barragan's use of light in the Capuchin convent chapel in Mexico City.
Yeah. I think Ando was deeply influenced by Barragan. I introduced in the beginning Ando's career as a boxer, and then he gave up the career, and he decided the money he earned through fighting to apply that money to traveling. And I think his traveling included Barragan's architecture. Barragan was already known in Japan during the 1950s and 60s. Barragan's work fascinated many East Asian people, actually. I could be wrong, but there is a publication like GA. Such publication, I think, created special issues, I think, on Barragan. So anyway, Barragan was very famous. He was well known. The images people could see were really fascinating. So Ando visited Barragan's work. So I know that some of the treatment of light Barragan does may remind one or may so some treatment of light by Barragan was the source for Ando when he was trying to create a cross like this. I could be wrong, but there is a window in Barragan's architecture with an additional layer of wood board, and the board was divided into 4 parts. And when the board was closing, there's a moment when through the gap, the light appears in the shape of the cross. So I know that image, and as I saw that image, I was instantly reminded of Ando's cross of light. But Ando does not talk about Barragan as the source of inspiration for when he was designing this church. I don't know whether it was it's intentional or not, but
thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe a final comment, really, from a person named Alejandra, saying, I was just saying that with my husband. That is the Barragan and the connection. We got to the conclusion that both Luis and Tadao had come to a final result by their own experiences, both in their immediate context or reading or or reading of characters, such
Yeah.
as Saint Augustine or Tanizaki.
Okay. One difference, though, could be that in Mexico, I have not been there. I'd like to go there, but light must be very strong.
It is, yeah.
Right, but in Japan, in Korea too, the climate is monsoon, so there are a lot of humidity in the atmosphere. So the light is not as clearly present and visible as in the case of Mexico, I guess. So for instance, if you create a skylight in East Asia, Japan, the effect of light is not going to be as strong as the effect of light that could be made by a skylight in a building built in Mexico or in Greece. So in this case, what is interesting is that Ando created this cross of light on the front wall that's facing the south. It's a sort of direct introduction of light from the south, because I think that's the way, or at least one way, to formulate a very strong presence of light in the atmosphere of East Asia. And I think Ando was very successful here.
So the orientation matters in the church.
Yeah, I think so, yes. Yeah. It's very radical in a way. The south part, the south wall, which is the front wall, was the wall where it was the piercing of the slit in the shape of the cross was done.
Well, thank you very much, Jen. I wonder if Haley has some final remarks.
I'm just blown away by Jin's in-depth dive into Church of the Light and the concept of nothingness. I'm still processing what that means. That is beyond.
I hope I have not tortured you.
Absolutely not. I hope our audience is just as was enlightened. I'm sure we will have like after conversations. My one remark was about Le Corbusier's influence on Tadao Ando in terms of Church of the Light, because Tadao Ando apparently named his dog Le Corbusier.
That's right. Yes, yes.
So, but just a side joke. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jin, and thank you, Juan, for this incredible talk and discussion and in-depth research into Church of the Light in context of state of nothingness. And thank everyone. And I think that concludes our program of this evening.